you were to see her, I think you would be extremely proud of her. I really do.
She's alive. She's alive.
She's alive. Let me tell you, she's right now.
Have you ever heard the name Jennifer Schuett? Most people haven't. But once you know her story, you'll never forget it. Who was this little girl from a quiet Texas town? Why did her name echo through police files for nearly 2 decades? And how did a single detail she remembered as a child become the key to unlocking one of the most haunting cases in American history? It was August 1990, a summer night like any other in Dickinson, Texas. A town where families trusted their neighbors, where children rode bikes until dark, where no one imagined danger could slip through an unlocked door. But in the early hours of that morning, something did. An 8-year-old girl lay asleep in her bed. The sound of cicadas filled the air. Her stuffed animals were tucked around her. Everything was calm until it wasn't. She opened her eyes. A man was standing at her bedside. Who was he? Why was he there? And what he whispered next would change her life forever. This is the story of Jennifer Schuett, a story of silence, survival, and a fight for justice that stretched across 19 years. But before we get there, you need to know what happened that night. When the sun rose over Dickinson, Texas that August morning in 1990, the quiet town woke as if it were any other day. But just beyond the streets lined with modest homes and front lawns, something unthinkable had already taken place. A little girl had vanished from her bed during the night. Her name was Jennifer. She was only 8 years old. How could a child disappear from her own bedroom without anyone noticing? Where had she gone? And more terrifyingly, would anyone ever see her alive again? Hours later, a passerby spotted something in an overgrown field. At first, it looked like debris in the tall grass. But as they drew closer, the horrifying truth emerged. A small body, motionless, barely clinging to life. It was Jennifer. Her throat had been cut so deeply that doctors later said survival should have been impossible. Her skin was pale, her clothes torn, her tiny frame covered in dirt and crawling ants. But somehow, against all odds, her heart was still beating. How had she survived? Who had left her there, broken and bleeding? And why wasn't she already gone? Jennifer was rushed to the hospital. Surgeons fought through the night to save her life. They wrapped her neck in thick bandages, hooked her to machines, whispered grim predictions to her mother. She may never speak again, one doctor warned. To most, those words would have sounded like the end of a story. But for Jennifer, it was only the beginning. Lying in her hospital bed, Jennifer's body weak, her voice silenced, she asked for one thing: a pencil and paper. Her small hand shook as she wrote down a single word. A name: Dennis. Who was Dennis? Had she seen his face clearly? Could an 8-year-old really hold on to details strong enough to solve her own case? Detectives leaned forward. Her mother froze. Jennifer kept writing. She sketched a mustache. She gestured to her hair. She scribbled notes about the smell of cigarettes, the clink of soda cans in the man's car, the color of his hair. Piece by piece, a picture formed. Jennifer couldn't speak, but she had become an eyewitness. Police brought in a sketch artist, and with only nods, scribbles, and small gestures, Jennifer guided the artist's hand until the face of her attacker stared back from the paper. Was this enough? Would the town recognize him? Would police finally catch the man who had left her for dead? Detectives canvassed the neighborhood. They showed the sketch to locals. They interviewed men with mustaches, men who smoked, men who drove cars littered with soda cans. They even looked for anyone named Dennis. But this was 1990. DNA evidence was still primitive. National databases were limited. Technology that could solve the case in seconds today simply didn't exist back then. And so, despite Jennifer's extraordinary bravery, no arrest came. Weeks turned into months. months into years. Jennifer returned to school, her voice weak, often replaced by scribbled notes. Other children stared at the scar running across her throat. Some whispered, others kept their distance. Jennifer, still so young, carried the weight of silence every single day. At night, she wrote notes to her mother. "I will not stop." Her determination never wavered. She had survived something most wouldn't. She had remembered every detail. She had even given police a name. And still nothing. By the end of that year, Jennifer knew the most chilling truth of all. The man who tried to kill her was still out there, free, living his life. And the question that haunted her more than any other was simple. Would he come back? For Jennifer, silence became her weapon. She had given police everything she could, but as the years dragged on, her fight for justice turned into something much larger, a battle against time itself. And nearly 2 decades later, a single test would finally reveal whether her childhood memories had been right all along. Years passed. Jennifer Schuett grew up with a scar carved across her throat, a permanent reminder of the night her childhood ended. She tried to live like any other teenager, but the shadow of that summer in 1990 followed her everywhere. Every birthday, every holiday, every quiet night alone. Somewhere out there, her attacker was free. Was he living nearby? Had he hurt someone else? Would he come back? By the late 1992nd, Jennifer was no longer a child. She was a young woman. She worked, she studied, she tried to move forward. But every time she looked in the mirror, the scar looked back at her, a wound that had healed on the outside, but not on the inside. She remembered everything. The cigarettes, the soda cans, the mustache, and the name, Dennis. She had given police all of this. And yet, nothing. Why had the case gone cold? Why had no one been arrested? And how could a child give them the name of her attacker, yet still be left waiting for justice? The 2002 brought something Jennifer never had in 1990. Progress. DNA technology had advanced in ways no one could have predicted. Where the early tests were clumsy and unreliable, new forensic methods were precise, able to match a suspect with near certainty. And for Jennifer, that meant something she had been begging detectives for years to do was finally possible. Test the old evidence again. Imagine being Jennifer. You're in your 20s now. You survived what no child should. You grew up without answers. And the only thing keeping you going is the hope that one day science might prove you were right all along. So she pushed. She wrote letters. She made phone calls. She refused to let her file stay buried in the back of some evidence room. Her persistence worked. In 2008, 19 years after her attack, investigators finally reopened the case. They pulled out dusty storage boxes. Inside, clothing, photographs, biological samples carefully preserved since that terrible August morning in 1990. Forensic scientists ran them through the latest DNA profiling. And when the results came back, detectives froze. The DNA matched a man named Dennis Earl Bradford. Stop for a moment and think about this. At 8 years old, lying in a hospital bed with her voice stolen, Jennifer had scribbled the name Dennis. She had drawn his face. She had remembered the cigarettes, the soda cans, the mustache. 19 years later, science had finally caught up. She had been right all along. Investigators learned Bradford had left Texas behind and built a new life in Arkansas. To his neighbors, he was a mechanic, a husband, a father, just another ordinary man living in the suburbs. But Jennifer knew the truth. Behind the mask of normalcy was the man who tried to silence her forever. Now came the most dangerous part: the arrest. If Bradford suspected he was being watched, he might run. So investigators moved quietly. They tracked his movements. They gathered information. They prepared. On an October morning in 2009, the silence of a sleepy Arkansas neighborhood shattered. FBI agents surrounded his house before sunrise. Bradford, barefoot and confused, was led away in handcuffs. After 19 years, Jennifer's attacker was finally in custody. When detectives told her the news, Jennifer could tears filled her eyes. The name she had written as a child, the one word that carried her fight for almost 2 decades, was now printed on an arrest warrant. And in that moment, Jennifer knew. She had not only survived, she had won. But catching him was only the beginning. The real question was, would Jennifer finally get to face the man who had stolen her childhood? Or would justice slip away once again? For 19 years, Jennifer Schuett carried the truth inside her. Now, with Dennis Bradford in custody, detectives finally had the chance to confront him with the evidence. But the question lingered. Would he deny everything? Would he fight? Or would he finally confess? Inside an interrogation room in Arkansas, Bradford sat across from detectives. He was calm. Too calm. The man who had lived for nearly 2 decades as a husband, a father, a mechanic now stared at investigators as though this was all a misunderstanding. The detective slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs from 1,990, reports, and the results of the DNA test. Bradford's hands tightened. His eyes shifted. Then, in a chillingly flat tone, he admitted the unthinkable. Yes, he had taken Jennifer. Yes, he had cut her throat. Yes, he had left her in that field, believing she would die. No apology, no emotion, no remorse, just confirmation of what Jennifer had known since she was 8 years old. For investigators, it was both relief and horror. Relief that the case was solved. Horror at how casually Bradford admitted to trying to kill a child and then living as though nothing had happened. Detectives began piecing together his life after the crime. They discovered he had moved to Arkansas, gotten married, and even had a child. To his neighbors, he was ordinary. To Jennifer, he was the nightmare that had haunted her since childhood. The contrast was chilling. She had grown up with scars, therapy, and trauma. He had grown up with a family and freedom. Meanwhile, Jennifer prepared herself. This was the moment she had imagined for 19 years. The trial. The confrontation. The chance to stand in a courtroom, look him in the eye, and tell him, "You did not destroy me." She met with prosecutors. She practiced her testimony. She thought about the words she wanted to say, not just for herself, but for every survivor who had been silenced. Her scar was still visible, her voice was still raspy, but her determination was sharper than ever. As prosecutors built their case, the evidence piled up. The DNA results, undeniable. Bradford's confession, recorded. Jennifer's testimony, preserved from the moment she picked up a pencil in her hospital bed. The story was airtight. The trial would be devastating but winnable. For Jennifer, this wasn't just about justice. It was about closure. About finally ending 19 years of nightmares. About proving that even an 8-year-old girl, left for dead, could rise again and face the man who tried to silence her. But as the trial drew closer, something unexpected happened. Something no one could have predicted. Before Jennifer could stand in front of a jury, before she could face Bradford in open court, news broke that would shatter her hopes all over again. Dennis Bradford would never make it to trial. The man Jennifer had waited 19 years to confront had one last, shocking decision to make, and it would deny her the justice she had fought for nearly her entire life. For nearly 2 decades, Jennifer Schuett dreamed of one moment. Walking into a courtroom, looking her attacker in the eye, and saying the words he had tried to steal from her. "You did not destroy me." Now, with Dennis Bradford behind bars and prosecutors preparing for trial, it seemed that moment was finally within reach. But fate had one more twist, one that Jennifer never saw coming. In the weeks after his arrest, Bradford sat in a Texas jail cell awaiting trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA, Jennifer's eyewitness account, and his own quiet confession. To prosecutors, the case was clear. To Jennifer, it was personal. She practiced her testimony late at night. She thought about standing before a jury, showing the scar across her throat, telling the story that had lived inside her for 19 years. It wouldn't just be her victory. It would be proof that survivors can rise stronger than the violence meant to silence them. Her friends encouraged her. Her mother reminded her how far she had come. Jennifer believed she was finally on the edge of closure. But then came the phone call. On the 2nd of October, 2010, just months after his arrest, Dennis Bradford was found dead in his jail cell. He had taken his own life before the trial could begin. The news hit Jennifer like a second blade across her throat. "He stole something from me when I was 8 years old," she later said. "And he stole from me again when he ended his life before I could face him." 19 years of waiting, of preparing herself for that one confrontation, vanished in an instant. The community's response was divided. Some people felt relief. Bradford could never hurt another child again. The nightmare was truly over. But for Jennifer, it wasn't that simple. Yes, she was safe. Yes, his life was over. But justice had been taken out of her hands once more. She had waited nearly 2 decades for her day in court. And now, it would never come. She was left with questions no trial could ever answer. Why had he chosen her? Had he harmed others? Would he have confessed publicly, under oath, for the world to hear? Those answers died with him in that jail cell. For a time, Jennifer felt robbed. Not of survival, she had fought too hard for that, but robbed of the closure she had long imagined. Still, she made a choice. She would not let Bradford's final act of silence define her story. "He will never walk free again," she said firmly. "That's what matters." In the months that followed, Jennifer redirected her energy. Instead of preparing for trial, she began speaking out more than ever. She told her story in schools, in conferences, in front of advocacy groups. Her raspy, scarred voice carried more weight than any courtroom verdict. Children leaned forward in silence as she explained how she had survived. Parents hugged her, thanking her for giving their families awareness. Survivors of other crimes wrote to her, saying her courage gave them hope. Jennifer realized something powerful. She didn't need a judge or jury to validate her survival. She didn't even need Bradford's conviction. She had already won by living. The man who had tried to silence her was gone, but Jennifer's voice was louder than ever. And as she continued to speak, she discovered that her story wasn't just about justice for herself. It was about fighting for others. It was about making sure no child's case sat forgotten for 19 years again. Jennifer's voice, once nearly stolen forever, would become her greatest weapon. She would transform from a victim into an advocate, from silence into a voice of hope that inspired thousands. The scar across Jennifer Schuett's throat will never fade. It is permanent, visible proof of the night she should not have survived. For some, that scar would have been a reminder of fear. For Jennifer, it became a symbol of strength. After Bradford's death, Jennifer could have chosen silence. She could have hidden her past, buried her pain, and tried to live quietly. But that wasn't who she was. Instead, she stepped forward into classrooms, auditoriums, and conferences, her raspy voice carrying more power than the clearest speech. Her words weren't polished. Speaking was painful. Every sentence scratched across her throat. But audiences didn't care. In fact, it made her message stronger. Because when Jennifer spoke, people listened. Children stared in wide-eyed silence as she told her story. How she had been taken. How she had survived. How she had remembered every detail. Parents wept openly, thanking her for showing them how to protect their children. Other survivors wrote letters, telling her that her courage gave them the strength to keep fighting. Jennifer's voice, once nearly stolen forever, became her greatest weapon. But she didn't stop at storytelling. Jennifer became a fighter for systemic change. She spoke out about the flaws in the justice system, the forgotten evidence, the lack of resources. The 19 years her case sat cold. She worked with advocacy groups, pushing for faster DNA testing, for more support for survivors, for better protection of children. Her message was clear. No case should ever be left behind. No survivor should ever feel invisible. Through her advocacy, Jennifer transformed her pain into purpose. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a teacher, a fighter, a voice for those who hadn't yet found their own. Today, Jennifer is not remembered as the girl who was left for dead. She is remembered as the woman who refused to be silenced. She built a life career, family, and purpose beyond the shadow of one night. Her scar no longer told the story of what was taken from her. It told the story of what she reclaimed. When Jennifer closes her speeches, she often looks into the audience and says, "The darkness tried to take my voice, but I answered with my pen, my courage, and my life." We are all fighters. We all have the power to keep going. Think about that. At 8 years old, she wrote her attacker's name when she couldn't speak. At 27, DNA proved she had been right all along. And today, her voice carries further than his violence ever could. Dennis Bradford died in silence, but Jennifer Schuett lived and showed the world that no voice, no matter how faint, can ever truly be silenced. Her story is not about what was taken from her. It's about what she gave back. Hope, strength, courage. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, survival is possible, and a single voice can change everything. Jennifer Schuett's life is proof of one unforgettable truth. No matter how deep the scar, courage will always find its voice. Disclaimer: this video fully complies with YouTube's community guidelines. All visuals, including news footage, photographs, court documents, and other publicly released material, are presented under fair use for educational and documentary purposes. Sensitive or graphic content has been edited and blurred in accordance with YouTube policies.